You're listening to the 2017 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers Programme. This session features Steve Braunias in conversation with Grant Smithies. Hello everyone, welcome. Hi. Welcome to the 2017 Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers Programme. Very glad to have you all here today. With me is Grant Smithies. He is our chair for today. He'll be interviewing Steve Braunias, who is, I would say, easily New Zealand's top journalist, winning basically every award going across media and literature in the past, how long has it been?
I've been around forever.
For a while. He's also a very generous mentor of young writers as well, and we're very glad to have him here in Nelson, so welcome. And I'll just mention the book signing afterwards will be outside as we've got a band coming in to set up. So if you could buy your books and then head out, Steve will be just in front of the bathrooms there. Thanks.
No expense spared. Great to see you, Steve. I'm looking forward to you doing all the talking and me sitting back and listening about your about this book and others. But I thought, firstly, one thing would be interesting to a lot of people that are here, I'm sure, is how you came to be writing things in the first place. You know, you grew up in the provinces, in Mount Maunganui.
Yes. As I mentioned to Naomi just before, I've been around forever, and indeed, I went to journalism school in 1980, and so I'm planning to write or publish a memoir in 2020 called 40 Years a Hack. You heard it here first. And yeah, I just popped along to journalism school. It was a distinguished year. It included a gentleman who was luxuriously mustachioed, stupid, and very lazy. And he later became the luxuriantly mustachioed, stupid, and lazy Mark Sainsbury. Great guy, though. And of that class of 50, I distinguished myself by being the one person to fail to graduate. And at that stage, I knew that I was destined for a career in journalism.
And I remember reading one interview where you talked about being fascinated by magazines and comics in particular when you're a nipper, and particularly one guy in particular writing about football. That was quite lovely, I thought, who used to write quite elaborate and long and impressive sentences, which you took to sort of emulating, and it was a lovely. I think you were talking to some Duncan Grieve maybe in the spin-off, and you were talking about even. Oh yeah, it's at the top of my head. There we go. And you were talking about how even when you were quite young and you're writing these long sentences yourself, some words stuck out like jewels, which I thought was lovely. Do you remember, had that sense of writing giving you pleasure right from those early days?
Yeah, very much so. I was obsessed with football, and so I subscribed to all these English football magazines and comics as well. And this particular chap, who was a columnist in World Soccer, was a guy called Brian Glanville, and he was regarded as the great dean of English football writing, and he would write very long Byzantine sentences, and some parts of it would be in Latin, then there would be bursts in Italian, and he was very funny, very cruel, impossibly opinionated. And I just revered him. And many, many years later, I got the chance to go to England on a scholarship or a fellowship at Oxford. And the project that I wanted to do while I was there was a history of English football writing. And this involved travelling around England, interviewing these old football writers, including Glanville, who had become, as well as a football writer, a novelist of some distinction, and he lived in Holland Park behind a blue door. He was about 70. We spent the afternoon talking, and it was a great thrill. As anyone who's been over to the Northern Hemisphere knows, it gets dark in England in winter at about 2:05. The room grew dim, and there was some light coming in from a open curtain. He didn't put on any lights. It grew darker and darker. In the end, we were sitting there in the pitch black. And I was interviewing my hero and my literary inspiration. And I finally said to him at around about, virtually midnight, which is to say 5 to 4, "I can't see you, Brian. Could you turn on a lamp?" And he said, "The expense. The expense." But he relented, and about an hour later, we'd been sitting there for about 4 hours. Pam, his wife, brought in a plate of biscuits, 3 biscuits. He ate the lot. But he was a tremendously impressive, distinctive, strange, intense, tormented, very funny guy. The whole cliche about never meet your heroes, complete nonsense. It was just a wonderful afternoon. And I remember just before I left, and I said, "Well, you've meant so much to me and to a lot of readers, of your football writing and your fiction as well." He writes very mordant short stories. I've taken to reading them to my 10-year-old, but she's banned me from ever reading Glanville to her again. They all end in depression or death. She's quite shallow, really. And I said to him, "What do you think you've achieved?" And by this time, the one, 10-watt lamp was on, and he held his very long Roman face in his hands and said, "Nothing, nothing." And I thought, that's just exhilarating. It's just exhilarating.
Good stuff. And I think you spent some time, your early, entree into the thrilling world of journalism was in Greymouth as a court reporter, was it not? What was that like?
Oh yeah, Greymouth. Yeah, it was great. It was fantastic. I didn't know a soul. Came into town, and they put me up at the Railway Hotel. I arrived on a Sunday night, and I thought, well, I'll go for a stroll along the waterfront or the river. And they had to drag me out of the river. It was quite rotten piles of the wharf there. So that was a dramatic sort of debut. But I absolutely loved it. It was fascinating to go to such a vivid and intense place where suffering seemed to be the sort of daily routine among the people. And court reporting became something that I'd never done it before, didn't know my way around a courtroom at all. And I was helped tremendously by the man from the Christchurch Press, a tremendously overweight individual called Pat. And you could smoke in court in those days, and he would smoke 2 packets of Sportsman 25 and showed me the ropes. And he gave me a lot of advice. He was really helpful. Some of it I didn't take to heart. I think he said on day 3, the thing to remember, Stephen, is that humanity is scum. You could see how we'd formed that point of view after being a court reporter for 30 years in Greymouth, where, forms of bizarre violence were were recorded every day. There was a really great one where, this is a bad story. If you're sensitive to these kinds of things, then I hasten you to leave now. But there was a chap who was up for assault on a woman And what had happened is that they were at the Golden Eagle, which is the bar that I drank in. And the woman wanted to strike up a conversation with this gentleman who came in with his dog. To gain his attention, she began to masturbate his dog. This did get his attention. He punched her in the face. The man's lawyer, in defending this action to the judge, said, "My client was highly upset and so was his dog." Just another day in Greymouth.
Yeah. And do you think that set you up years later to write, things like The Scene of the Crime, where you went back and wrote about, crime in New Zealand and the kind of shabby nature of it?
The shabby nature. It's well put, Grant. Yeah. It really did. I was a young journalist in Greymouth, and you're just sort of finding your way out about people and how it fits into some sort of mosaic of life in New Zealand. And so later on, I began to see ways that what was happening in court trials was a ready-made and often disturbing portrait of the way that we live now. And just absolutely loved going to trials for a long, long time. I'm going on Tuesday and Wednesday to Wellington to the Court of Appeal for Mark Lundy's latest appeal on his murder conviction.
Yeah. Which you followed along the way, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I did.
And met Mark several times, and his can't remember his name, but the advocate.
Jeff Levick.
Yes.
He was the chap who basically single-handedly got him released from prison to face a retrial. He was a kind of a David Bain without a happy ending, I suppose. You could say that it was a kind of a reversal of justice. Joe Karam got a guilty guy off, and Jeff Levitt got an innocent guy imprisoned. Anyway, my opinion about Bain isn't worth 2 cents worth. And you all agree with me, don't you? But yeah, it was crime trials. What I want to say is that you would have all heard this particular word from not just journalists but also fiction writers, possibly also poets, I guess, in some ways, is that they talk about life in terms of material. And it's that word you keep hearing over and over again. Oh, it's great material. I just hate that word with a passion. That, how dare you treat tragedies and various pains and sufferings as material. It's not like that. And you've really got to respect the fact that when you go to a trial in particular, you leave at the end of the day. I sound like John Key, don't I? At the end of the day, we all leave and lead a blame-free existence. And whereas, we're people here who are going to go to jail, and of course there's 2 families involved of the victim and of the accused, and they're going to live for that for the rest of their lives. And you ought not just purely regard it as material. It's life. And I think it does say something about New Zealand and its Gothic territories, which is a particular kind of strain of life here, which I've been really fascinated by and explored quite a lot in a previous book called Civilization, which I gather, actually, someone just mentioned before, I'm reading it on national radio on the 9 to noon show over last week and next week. And that was that book was about me going to 20 real small places, not knowing anybody and just sort of writing about them, evoking them. The closest to here would have been Collingwood, which I think I felt was the happiest place of all the 20 that I went to in New Zealand. But many others were really quite grim, quite Gothic places. And the crime book that I wrote later was basically Civilization with murder in it.
Yes. I remember I enjoyed the piece you wrote in Civilization in Wanganui, which is my hometown. You went and met Ross Mitchell Anion and looked down the big hole he'd dug in his front yard and stuff.
Oh,
I've
yes.
been round to that house. I know the
Really?
place.
Yeah.
Yes, and it really captured something of what Wanganui was like for me as someone who grew up there. So I always appreciated that.
Yeah, he's talking about a guy who, as an art statement, dug a hole. An enormous hole. You couldn't see the end of it.
No. There was
And-
lava bubbling at the bottom.
Was there? And
No.
He said something. He said something like, I asked something like, why did you do that? And he said, because it wasn't there.
Yes. He, it's somewhere along the line before you wrote all these books, your first big break, I think, was The Listener. Is that right, as far as being a feature writer goes?
Well, I've been around forever, and so there were places before that. Yeah. But not so much as a feature writer, but when I arrived at the magazine, I was appointed a weekly columnist, and I had a column called, which I called Page 94. And I was at the Listener. I remember I said in my farewell speech, well, I've had 5 really happy years here. Unfortunately, I stayed for a 6th.
Yes. You were there when Finlay MacDonald was the editor, who was the golden times of that.
Yeah, he was there for 5 years.
Yeah. Yes.
But writing that column, it was one interesting thing about it is that when it appeared, email hadn't really existed. It was 1999, and it immediately started attracting a lot of people writing into me. When I say writing, they were writing letters, and got a little manila folder and started putting them in. And but I do this every year, and by the end of the year, there's this bizarrely fat folder. And by the end of my time there, letter writing had pretty much finished, and people were just emailing. And so I'd collect the emails in an electronic file. And yeah, those last 3 years, it was uncanny. You do a word count at the end of the year of how much you'd received, and every year it was the same. It was the same number, 32,000 words. Spooky. Yeah.
Of feedback.
Yeah.
You were edited the Capital Times in Wellington for a while too, and one of the things I thought was great about that sordid chapter in your history is you had bugger all of a budget and professed to be numerous people writing under pseudonyms, like a cultural critic called Hector Pigott or something, and there was a music critic called the Reverend something or other.
Ozzy Jessup.
Yes, which were all you saying things that you wouldn't necessarily say about the things you were reviewing too, I think, weren't they?
Yes, I had a lot of very prolific columnists who didn't exist. And I used to get their byline photographs. I'd clip out pictures from wrestling magazines. A literary critic looked like a complete savage from Borneo or something. It was ridiculous. Yeah, and that's right. And it was a sort of an entertainment listings magazine in Wellington, and so you'd have all the local bands and where they were playing and descriptions of, including art galleries. And I decided to invent an artist who exhibited a new show every week at the Fat Gallery, and her name was Cecilia Buttle. She was a conceptual artist, and this was at the high watermark of concept art in Wellington, which just had to be, well, you couldn't see it because it didn't fucking exist. It had to be not seen to be believed. It was so bad and would attract such reverent attention, these lame ideas. And so Cecilia Buttle's shows would customarily be about her lying beneath a ladder, and the show would be called Bad Luck.
Good stuff. It must have been, I think when you, one interview I was reading, you were talking about how in those days you got really good at writing, not caring so much about the deadline or lots of other things, but the length of space you had to fill. You know, if it was 800 words, if it was 2,000. And somewhere along the line, I think even earlier, you would type things in a semi-obsessional way. Tell me about that, because that was funny to read. I read a thing where you were saying you used to type out all the quotes and cut them out and rearrange them. But if you got to the bottom of a typed page and made a spelling mistake down here, you'd type the whole thing again from the top.
Geez, you're like a Steve scholar or something.
Yeah, that's right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great chair. That's before computers, I would.
Oh no, I was interested in it because it's you working out how to structure things. Because one of the things I like with things you write is the elegant way they slot together and are structured. So I wonder if it partially came from that.
Yeah, may have. What Grant is referring to was with Capital Times, that I would design the newspaper every week and size the photographs and the headlines and so forth, and there would be, so many column inches left. And that was how many words I would have to write, because there would be a very easy mathematic of how many column inches equaled how many hundreds of words. And so if it was 1,000 words, you go, right, this is going to be exactly 1,000 words or 250, and so on. And I really love that discipline where the look of things was paramount, and that would dictate the length of something. And I think maybe along the way, I formed very definite views on the tone and scope of a particular kind of writing, because the first thing I always wanted to know from a commissioning editor after Capital Times was, how long is it? How long do you want it? And if it was 3,000 words, then your writing would have a certain tone to it, as opposed to 800. And 800 might be frisky. It might be quite jovial. It might be quite amiable. And 3,000 would be more sort of content, very patient, avuncular, and make some show of having an intelligent thought, even though it may not necessarily possess anything resembling that.
I got the impression from a few things you've written down the years that you really discovered something. You were feature writing, but you discovered a whole new side to your writing when you started to write columns, that you could kick them around in different ways. You could write things that ended oddly. You could develop strands of columns that you might roll another one out with the same characters several weeks later. Tell me a bit about that, because I loved reading those for years. They were I always found them deeply entertaining every weekend. Always beautifully written, sometimes kind of sad in between being funny, sometimes quite, cutting. They had a lot of emotional range I liked about them.
Yeah, they were every week, and I was constantly being sort of asked by people, well, how do you come up with ideas all the time, or do you find it difficult to do this? And I never found it difficult. I just found it really interesting that you would be writing something that would be 872 words every week for, I think it went on for 9 years. And you would, I was very much a creature of mood. What was I feeling? What was not so much on my mind. I don't think the columns paid a hell of a lot of attention to current events. That was something refreshing about them, actually, because given how many commentators are spinning their wheels on what happened that week, Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah, I really hate columnists who have opinions. Really hate them. Shut up. Christ's sake. Of course, these days there's hardly any columnists anyway. It's almost like this is a dreadful thing to say, but I almost miss Michael Laws.
Yes.
Yeah, so no, they weren't set up as, here's my take. Another dreadful word. It's up there with material. This is my take on the political ramification of something or other. I sort of very quickly formed the notion that I would have motifs. throughout this writing columns week after week after week. And so it was never, I never saw it as just one-offs. I think I saw it very early on as this is a long project, and this will have motifs which will reoccur and will be a kind of a series. And I remember thinking that in a very similar sort of context with that book, Civilization. How it began is that North and South magazine approached me, and they said, what would you like to do for us? What would you like to do? And I said, well, actually, my idea is that I would like to go to a town where nothing has ever happened, nothing ever will, and write 10 pages about it every month. And they said, that's a great idea. This is just before journalism collapsed and you couldn't afford those kinds of indulgences. And the other idea is that I want to go with Jane Ussher, the photographer. We worked very closely together back then. And the very first place Jane and I went to, and literally I was choosing them.
I was at the Desert Road. You guys did a great one on that.
Jesus wept. How did you know that?
I remember that series. It was great.
I should be interviewing you about Steve Braunias. He sounds quite interesting. The real one's dull as dishwater.
Yeah.
So it was very much a randomly choosing where we would go. And, you just have the map, really, and I'd have a pin. And it landed in Waihuru. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know anything about it. And we came back from it, and I wrote this very long piece about Waihuru. And I thought, oh, my God, this is suddenly became the most important thing in my writing life. And this is all I want to do. I want to go to these deserted places all the time with Jane, and that became Civilization.
Yeah, that episodic way of writing columns has really lent itself to them then being able to be compiled into books too. Obviously, it's been a good lark as far as that goes, including this most recent one, which we will talk about eventually, by the way. But it means that those recurring themes can get kind of, because when you compile things into a book, you then extensively rewrite them. Hey.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the Civilization one, I think I wrote, there's 20 places, and I think I wrote about 9 for North and South. And then I decided to stop writing them for the magazine and write a book, and the 11 extra ones we did purely for the book. I was lucky enough to get a grant which allowed for that. And goodness gracious, it was terribly hard work. It really was. It was, I don't think there's no way I could do that again, I think the subheading of it was Civilization, 20 places at the edge of the world. And I thought, well, the book did quite well and everything. And I thought, well, maybe, I could do a sequel, Civilization, another 20 places at the edge of the world. There's so many places I wish I'd gone to, But I don't think I could do it. When I came like a year or two after that book to record it for Radio New Zealand, this series is being repeated at the moment. By the way, the reason they're repeating it, because I wrote it in 2013 and recorded it around about 2015, is that Radio New Zealand, I've had all these budget cuts, and they no longer produce New Zealand books or plays, as I recall, and so they're just repeating these things, which normally they would repeat, on the Lloyd Jones Midnight to Dawn show, but even now Lloyd Jones is gone. I mean, where are we that Lloyd Jones is gone? We're nowhere. He was the rock. And so, they're repeating them now. When I came to record them, I realized as I was reading them that, I didn't have, I probably lost that ability to observe things the way that I did in that particular book. It took a lot out of me to do so, and I have this working definition of journalism that a lot of it is basically approaching complete strangers and asking them really intimate questions about their lives. And that's real hard, actually, if you happen to be, like I am, a very shy and uncertain kind of individual.
I suppose it leads you naturally to an excellent idea to write about yourself pigging out on salt and fat and chicken in Lincoln Road. You can write. I thought it was a great idea for a series of columns, but
Thanks.
The Herald took some convincing, didn't they?
Oh, they hated the idea.
Because how did you pitch it up to them?
Obviously, quite ineffectively. The notion is that bought a house in West Auckland, a suburb called Te Aratu, and our daughter, not long after we moved in, began breaking her delicate bones over and over. And so we were forever travelling up to the A&E to attend to these broken bones with casts and crutches. And the A&E was on a street called Lincoln Road. It's in West Auckland. It was very close to where we lived. And we were there constantly. And so was all of Auckland. So it seemed. It was just loaded with traffic every single hour of the day. It's actually the second busiest stretch of roading in New Zealand. It's 3 kilometres in length. And I just became really fascinated, like, what are these people doing? And what meaning does it have about where we are now and who we are and what are we doing? And I thought this is telling me something about life in Auckland or indeed life in New Zealand. What is it? What is it that's attracting so many people and this particular kind of energy to the place? And the more and more I went there, the more I was convinced that I was onto something. But what was it? What was it? And of course it was right in front of my face. In the 3 kilometres, there were 50. I walked the length of it one day. I'm going to find out what it is on foot. And I began counting how many places there were to eat. And there were 55. And they were almost entirely franchises: McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, Burger Fuel, Sal's Pizza, Domino's, Pizza Hut, and so on. 55 of them. And it was like the streets were lined with salt. And it was telling us something about the way we eat now and who we are. And so I went to the Herald upon this momentous discovery and said, I need to eat at every single one of these places in a calendar year and write about it every week for your newspaper. And they said, get fucked. So I kept
numerous editors said get fucked, not just one, eh?
Well, I kept
People
approaching.
bounced it from section to section and they all went get fucked.
They did. I thought, well, the business pages, they'll be interested in that. No, unbelievably, they weren't. I think I grovelled to the sports editor at one stage. Until finally, someone at a section known rather sort of vaguely as lifestyle showed mercy and said, yeah, I'll take it. It's great. And so it began, and it was a quest, really, to see if you could actually eat burgers, pizzas, and so forth for an entire year, and what that experience would feel like, and who you would meet, and what it would be like to be on this one particular street in the blue haze of the Waitakere Ranges. When I say it's West Auckland, I suppose the particular suburb that it belongs to is Henderson, which is better known in New Zealand literature as Loomis, which is the fictitious name that Morris G. gave it in pretty much all his novels. And so Loomis, which was the setting for all these sort of suburban shenanigans, murders, betrayals, was actually the setting for McDonald's and KFC. And I was, it was fascinating to do this for an entire year, to go through the seasons, to keep going to that particular street. And there was definitely times where it felt that I was trapped in one of the circles of hell, and that it would never end, and that I would fail to achieve, my goal. And I also became quite obsessed that I would die.
Your brother died partway along the way, did he not?
He
So
did.
that would have-
I knew very strongly in some sense that the theme of this quest was death. I just assumed it was mine. But my brother died towards the end of it, and I commemorated that in 2 or 3 of the places that I wrote about. And I continued to do that thing of, approaching complete strangers and asking them intimate questions about their lives. And when it all finished, I sat down with all of the stuff that I'd written, and I read it, and I thought, oh, that's a book. And I spent about a month rewriting it and giving it structure and narrative sort of flow. And I also added something about 10,000, 15,000 words of new information or new insights or new something in footnotes, which is something that I plagiarized completely from a chap called David Foster Wallace, who was basically a complete genius with every breath that he took. And he wrote the most sensational kinds of non-fiction about popular culture, taking a cruise ship, and he would do 2 things at the same time. He would have this very long story, and he would tell another one in footnotes. And sometimes you would give up on the actual story and just read the footnotes. And one of the things I loved about it was that the footnotes were so difficult to read because the type size was so small. And I thought, I'm going to make them smaller.
Yes. You were responsible for me getting magnifying glasses finally, reading that book so I could read those bits. I was going to say one other thing about Lincoln Road that was interesting is it used to be the kind of fruit bowl, didn't it? It used to be orchards and grapevines, and it had become the fast food centre of Auckland. But it was once beautiful and full of blossom, and I think you either found some information in there or talked to some elderly characters that remembered it being like that.
Yeah, it was basically Motueka that became Trafalgar Street.
Yeah.
Does that stand up? Does that stand up? It was. I'd seen pictures of it when it was orchards and when it was grapes, and it was just like an Eden. I'd seen pictures of it during the spring and the blossom, and it was, indescribably beautiful. And it's all gone, and it's 3 kilometres of salt and fat.
Dead chickens?
So many chickens. So many chickens died for Lincoln Road. I've mooted the idea to the local council that they, like with Rakaya, with the statue of the leaping salmon, that they have statues of chickens at either end of Lincoln Road, and I believe they're looking into it. Phil Goff has put some money aside.
One thing that I liked about it was you could have, some writers at that point would have been all kind of wagged the finger about how terrible all this food was, but you are highly enthusiastic about it all the way through, and quite enthusiastic about the sort of comfort that you get from franchise, familiar surroundings. That if you go into McDonald's in Lincoln Road, it'll be the same as one in Paris or one in Wolverhampton or whatever, and how attractive that is for people. Tell us a bit about that, because it really is true, I think, for a lot of people that go to these places all the time.
Yeah, I sort of wondered about franchising the idea, the man who ate Wolverhampton or something.
Yes.
It's good food. It's really delicious. I just couldn't stop eating it. and the a lot of these places, McDonald's, KFC, and so forth, they're family restaurants, and so they're full of happiness. They're full of families having a real good time. And so all the sort of constant statistics, it's a sort of an army or a war of statistics about obesity and the harm that it does us going to these places. Oh, Christ almighty, people aren't stupid. They're going there for a good time. They know that, maybe it is a bad idea to eat 8 burgers in a sitting. You may get overweight if you're going to do that. But mostly they're full of tremendous happiness. And even though returning to this place over and over again did become tormenting, it was a real happy experience, I felt much more torment going to somewhere truly horrible like Antarctica.
Yes.
I'd much rather go to Lincoln Road.
Yeah. There's a few poignant bits in there about people that businesses that set up that aren't franchised, like Mr. Burger. One place gets a few mentions in there where the guy was just a pretty hopeless franchisee, wasn't he? And no one was ever in there. Every time you went past, it was empty.
Yeah.
And you just felt for the guy. Those places where someone sinks what little dosh they've got into trying to set up a business and the business falls on its ass.
Did this have particular resonance for you, Grant?
Yeah. My failing record store, exactly.
It's
and other hard-working family businesses too, people that had set up little places they'd staked their future on these places.
That's right. It's a cruel kind of place. It was a boulevard of broken dreams, and Mr. Burger, he didn't last. He got run out of town. It was too fast for him. Yeah.
I liked some part of the book you're saying as well, that you thought that junk food needed to be reviewed properly because it's what most people ate. Like usually it was treated like it wouldn't be something that you'd devote any serious time to contemplating or writing about. You have a few pot shots at Jesse Mulligan and other restaurant reviewers in the book, who are writing about far more fashionable and expensive food.
Yeah, well, one of the many things that attracted me to doing the project is that it is the way we eat now. Most people in this room would have had a McDonald's. Most people in this room, I hope, want another McDonald's. It's real good. But no one's really writing about it, and instead it is, Jesse Mulligan, who's a very pleasant, preposterous individual, paying far too much attention to sources and where scallops come from. And really, people aren't eating that shit. They're going to Burger King.
Yeah, that's right. What did you discover in the end about, you wanted to come up with some sort of insights into what it told us about ourselves going to all these places. After a whole year, what were your, chief insights you got out of it?
Page 312. All encapsulated there in 6-point.
Excellent, I'll read it. In fact, how do you feel about reading us a part that you like of the book? That'd be great.
Sure, thanks. All right. This one is, they don't have, it's not like chapter 1, chapter 2. Every chapter is just called Food Joint. This is Food Joint 49, so it's towards the end of the quest. And it's called A Love Story at Valentine's. The man who ate Lincoln Road sat by himself on Wednesday in the pretty vacant lot of Valentine's. I took a corner table, and that made me feel even more lonely and, let's be frank about it, pathetic. Valentine's seats maybe 100 people. 9 people were at lunch, and that included a baby. The manager on duty, a large, rather gloomy Indian fellow, moved ponderously in his kitchen whites. There were no other staff. The food in the buffet trays seemed kind of jaded. I looked out onto a view of a car park and the warehouse. I thought, I am in hell. But I just needed to relax and adjust to its charms. It was my first time at a Valentine's. The original Valentine's opened in 1989 in that great social laboratory of New Zealand, Pakuranga. There are now 8 other restaurants in Auckland, 1 in Hamilton and 1 in Petone. People go there for an occasion. It's something to celebrate with family and friends. It's always had that kind of appeal, a treat, somewhere nice to go with the kids or your deaf uncle. I plodded around the buffet trays and piled my plate with worryingly brown pieces of roast pork, wilted lettuce, dry chips, and stiff clumps of white rice. The buffet lunch is $15.90 and all you can eat, but there wasn't much that I wanted to eat. I passed on the Greek salad and the egg salad and the creamy potato salad, which had pieces of celery on top of it. Alone at my table on the corner, I was a loser picking at the bland meat. The music didn't help. "How great thou art," yelled Howard Morrison. I needed cheering up, so I went and had a chat with the other solitary diner. Manu Dunwoody, 42, from Henderson, was in terrific spirits. She'd just polished off her main meal and was about to attack the dessert. "Ooh," she said, "I love it here. It's a bit special, isn't it? I come here with my brother on my birthday. I've been here 10 times. Her surname, Dunwoody, she explained, was Scottish. "I'm Maori," she said. "They adopted me." I asked her to rate Valentine's out of 10. She gave it serious thought and then said 9. It would have been 10, but they didn't have any mussels today. "Ooh," she said, "I love me mussels." Her happiness was like a lesson that I wanted to learn. The best way to go about that, I figured, was to eat more. I piled my plate a second time with more pork and fries and roast potatoes, also quite a bit of curry chicken. And then I emptied a sachet of salt over it, and actually it was really delicious. Pale sunlight softened the view of the warehouse. "Like a river flows surely to the sea," Elvis sang. "Darling, so it goes." Love was in the air. An old couple came in. He wore a loud Hawaiian shirt. She wore a black beanie and held on to a walker. "I live in Amberwood Rest Home," said Barbara Wallace, 75. "This is Barry. He's 75. It's his birthday." I said, "Happy birthday." She said, "He can't hear you." A gunshot went off in his ear in the war. He wore his silver hair long. He was quite agile and he moved with a certain grace. Barbara said, "We met last November, November 19. We went to Green Lane Hospital for eye operations, and we've been together ever since." Barry gave the thumbs up. She said, "I've written 3 books. One is about my life. It's called I, Barbara. Some of it is very sad. I married 3 times and each of them belted me up. My second husband, I came home one day and he was in bed with 3 women, naked. I ran to the car, but he caught me and he punched my face so bad. But Barry," she said, "Barry's very kind and gentle and he's always giving me things." I said, "Is it love?" She said, "Oh, I'm sure it is. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Barry gave the thumbs up again. She said, "I write him letters." I said, "What do you write?" She looked him in the eyes, leaned closer and said, "What kind of things do I write to you?" He said, "Nice things." Their love story followed me to the dessert tray. where I piled my bowl with chocolate cake, chocolate log, a chocolate brownie, chocolate mousse, strawberry jelly, a green marshmallow with coconut icing and raspberry jelly. It was a continent of sweetness, a whole planet, and I explored every bit of it, and then I went back for more. "I'll be there," said Freddie Fender, "before the next teardrop falls." The guitar solo, that sharp, ringing Tex-Mex bell, filled the room. I looked over at Barry and Barbara. They were laughing.
Lovely. Beautiful. I loved it. It's by the time you were getting towards the end of the book, people were starting to recognise who you were, weren't they? You'd become a sort of supernatural figure on Lincoln Road.
Yeah.
People were coming up and going, "Aren't you the man who ate Lincoln Road?"
Yeah, they were. I travelled a lot during that year around the country, and it was strange. People would come up to me and I remember it was Bluff. "Oh, it's the man who ate Lincoln Road." And in Christchurch, "Are you the man who ate Lincoln Road?" "Yes." And I'd stopped being Steve for an entire year. And I just became, "You're the man who ate Lincoln Road." And I remember travelling, just around Auckland. I live in West Auckland. I'd be in South Auckland. And people would come up and say, "Oh, the man who ate Lincoln Road's a long way from home." You go, "Just 10 minutes away."
That's great, isn't it? It's I liked in one of the stories you mentioned one of my favourite ever short stories, which is The Swimmer.
Do you know that one?
I do, yeah. I love that. I was pleased to see it in your book, and I'll get Steve to tell you a bit about it. But it was a really pertinent comparison, I think, because the guy in the Swimmer wants to collect a set of something ultimately, and that's what you wanted to do with all these eating houses. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's The Swimmer. It's a short story by John Cheever, an American writer. It was made into a really good movie starring Burt Lancaster in the 60s. And, oh gosh, it's a very good story. It's the idea of it is devastating, devastatingly brilliant. It's about a character called Neddy. And Neddy decides one day that he's going to swim all the swimming pools in his neighbourhood. And he gets the idea and he thinks, "Yes, there's one over there and one over on that street and one over there." And he sees the neighbourhood all of a sudden in a kind of a vision, a subterranean tunnel of blue water. And he's going to swim it like a great explorer. And he's going to go from one to the other. And so it's quest literature, which is a genre. The worst example of it is Lord of the Rings. And all quest literature, I think it's a metaphor for life. And how does life end? Well, it ends in death or desolation. And that's what happens to this guy. But the whole fantastic idea of wanting to swim these pools and who's he going to meet and what's going to happen to him, I just thought was so incredible. And I wouldn't exactly come out and say that I plagiarised the idea or anything, but it did certainly occur to me that was the kind of thing I was doing. And I hit upon, too, the idea that it was a form of collecting. 55 places, 55 food joints, and I wanted to collect the set. And you become kind of obsessive about it, and also proprietorial. I wanted to be the man who not only ate Lincoln Road, I wanted to own it. I wanted to know it intimately, like an omnipotent sort of creature who had eaten it every single place. And when I return now, I feel 10 foot tall. But yeah, that collecting part of it, which I think is a big part of many people's lives, and you yourself would be no stranger to it, wouldn't you? It's an emporium of collecting. Is that right? How would you
with records and things?
yeah?
Yeah,
How would
yeah.
you describe your
Well,
folly?
when people say you've got a really big record collection, I'm always kind of slightly stunned because I never think of it as a collection. They're just things I like around me. They make me feel good. I like everything about them. Like when people have a lot of books around them. If I had a lot of books, I wouldn't think I was a book collector. It's just that they end up on every flat surface because there's something about them I deeply enjoy. So I do understand that impulse, though. Yeah, definitely. But I imagine in your case
I'd like you to talk further about this.
Yeah, well, some certain things make you feel good, don't they? And records is one of them for me.
He's having a reverie here.
Yeah, that's right. But it made me think with Lincoln Road, you'd get to like people painting the Golden Gate Bridge. When they get to the far end, they've just got to traipse back to the start because all the paint's worn off. You must get to one end of Lincoln Road and there's 3 new places started back there from some place that's shut down, like Mr. Burger, for example. So, it could be one of those things that every time you went to Lincoln Road, you realised that there are another 10 places you hadn't been to.
Not another 10. There have been others which have opened since I wrote the book, and I will occasionally go to them and write a vast story for the Herald called The Man Who Returned to Eat Lincoln Road.
Yes. There's a lovely, maybe to finish before some questions, I really like the way the book ends, which is not to give something away to anyone out there who's going to buy a copy and get it signed afterwards. But you go back to the places you like the most and then ponder long and hard about where to go and have a feast of your favourite things you ate on Lincoln Road. That's a lovely bit at the end of the book.
Yeah, I had a huge picnic for one. I was loaded down with food. I walked the length of it one side and then the other, getting everything that I liked. And I thought long and hard too about where to eat it. And there was one small section of Lincoln Road which had been an orchard. And I thought this is where I need to go. This is like the genesis of Lincoln Road. And also, the thing is that, obviously it's a specific place. It's real. It's in West Auckland. But I love I was fascinated and loved the way that it seemed to be a perfect kind of model of the way all of us are eating now and the way New Zealand is looking. And there's a Lincoln Road all throughout New Zealand, a line of junk food emporiums. This one was just the most extraordinary sort of potent actuality of it, to have 55 and 3 kilometres. So even though it was very specific, there was themes that came through, and one of the things which I felt with a real despair during this quest and this journey was I kept sometimes thinking, is this as good as it gets? Is this what we've come to? Is this our idea that we're going to have a whole lot of people working minimum wage or even below, serving substances which may resemble food and in some cases is food, in replicant places, which is the same everywhere? It's a kind of that feeling you get in airports, and they're very deliberately telling you that you don't know where you are, that you could be in any airport. I like that feeling, actually. And I get that feeling in shopping malls as well. I've become a real habitué of shopping malls. And I love the repeated shops. But at the same time, it's like, Jesus Christ, is this all that we've come to? And this quest was written about and experienced last year, and I could very much feel as though this Lincoln Road experience of small businesses working real hard to serve substances which resembled food and in some cases was food. There was a kind of a ghost there, and I think it was the ghost of John Key. There was a real at the end of the day-ness about it.
Yes, I'm sure. Oh, well, I'd just commend the book to people anyway who haven't read it, because it's very funny and sad and perceptive. And Steve will be signing some afterwards. And thanks, Steve.
Do we have time for a question?
Yeah, we do. We're going to have a heap if anyone's
If
got
there
any
is
questions
any.
they want to ask. You'll have to holler them out because we've got no microphone.
The author, Adam Dudding.
Right. In your Twitter bio, you describe yourself as fat. You don't look fat. Did you gain weight? And secondly, did you finish every meal at all 55 restaurants?
You're very greedy. That's about 4 questions for the price of one.
Typical journalist.
Fat men wear black. It's very thinning. It's like a mirage. Yes, I did put on a considerable amount of weight, and I very dramatically and very recently, as of yesterday, began a diet. I don't do things by halves. It's a water diet. All I've had for 2 days is water. Feel quite hungry, anxious, feverish, but wish me luck. And yes, I absolutely did finish all 55. Is there another question from that? Yes. I think so.
I'm just curious about your writing process. Did you take notes as you were there, and then did it percolate, and then, or did you just go home and write immediately?
Did you hear all that?
Yeah. Did you your writing process? Did you take notes in these places and then kind of splurge it out when you got home, write it immediately, or how did you cobble these things together?
I like neither splurge or cobble.
I was paraphrasing, of course.
I travel pretty much everywhere with a 3B1 Collins notebook, fits in your back pocket. And I would take obsessive notes. And I wouldn't write a word in my head or anything until I get back and find the time to write. And that's with absolutely everything. I basically discover what I've thought about a place and what my response to it, and not necessarily a place in Lincoln Road, but any kind of journalism really. Pretty much everything I write, I won't give it a single thought until I've sat down and start to write. And I tend to write real quick. I remember, in particular, with the Lundy trial, and I went there every day, that trial, this retrial, and didn't know what I was thinking. These very long days in court with, often some pretty amazing things being said, put it that way. And I didn't know what I thought about them till I would leave court early, because I was writing in daily instalments. It was very episodic for the Herald, and the deadline was 7 p.m. So I would leave court at about 4:30 and get back to whatever hotel that they had put me in Wellington, and immediately close the curtains, put on a pair of pajamas, not the other way around. And I would start writing pretty much like clockwork around about 5 to 5. And I would just start writing real quick. Writer's block is a myth, I think, which I'm not sure who perpetrates it. It's either the abundantly untalented or it's genius. I'm not sure which. But me, I just write real quick. Don't have a problem in writing.
And you have to, of course, in that situation. You've got 2 hours, and
It's almost though that the deadline is it's a bit of a gift. If don't have a deadline, I'm still going to write real quick. I've noticed. I noticed a long time ago, I think, that if I took a while to write something, it's going to be pretty terrible, because I think fast, and if I try and think slowly and patiently and with depth, I'm just going to reveal myself as a complete fucking dunderhead, which is what I really am. And I mustn't allow that to happen. So I've got to write quick.
Yeah. Hey, there was one more question down here. Actually, you had your hand up a few times.
No, one more. Go on.
A fast question.
I was just going to say, when you were in Greymouth, you met Peter Hooper, and
Yeah.
written or facilitated quite a discussion about him online recently. And I just wondered, from your experience, was he a special person in your Greymouth life?
Yeah, Peter Hooper was a terrific novelist and a poet. I think he was I think there were 3 people in Greymouth at the time who had more than 5 books in their house, and Peter was one of them. And yeah, he was a wonderful guy, and I suppose, he was probably the first guy I had met who belonged to or was part of something that we call, in a very sort of vague way, New Zealand literature. And I love that kind of connection, and that maybe I could be part of this, and that's something that I really loved about Adam Dudding's book, his portrait of his father, Robin Dudding, who was the literary editor of Landfall and Islands, and getting to work with Robin many years later, and he was like a legendary figure to me who I regarded with awe, even though on a day-to-day 9-to-5 basis he was such a hostile person who seemed to hate my guts. But no, I love that connection that you can have with New Zealand literature and with other writers, and the truth about New Zealand literature. There's a myth that there's this pettiness and vindictiveness and backbiting and stuff like that which goes on, and the truth is completely diametrically opposite. Most writers are incredibly supportive of each other. It's a real collegial kind of thing, and I would group people who read New Zealand literature very much in the same way. It's been a real privilege to meet a lot of people who read what I do, and they're real generous and real nice about it. And thanks for having me and Nelson, he said, wrapping it up in a tidy bow.
Great, thanks, Steve, for that. Thanks also to Page and Blackmore for the whole shebang and for their sponsorship and so on. That's much appreciated. I encourage everyone to buy copies of this because it's published by Steve's own Lunch and Sausage books, and he will make dosh out of it personally, which you can come and spend in my record store. So